So when you get your kefir grains first in mail, they'll look like a slightly beaten up version of this. I've just put the usual amount of grains that you get into a bowl. Um, it might not look as thick as this in terms of whatever is, left over. The liquid might be a little bit more thinner from the kefir grains eating it up while in transit. Uh, ideally, ideally do not rinse the grains that you get. If you feel that you absolutely must, rinse it only with filtered water, non-chlorinated, no, added minerals or any of those things. Wash it only in that, but unless you are really suspicious of, something looking absolutely wrong, don't do it. And if you do think something is wrong, ideally just reach out to the person who sold you the kefir grains. They would know whether something is wrong or not. So you take those grains and you would go ahead and add it into a glass jar, or plastic jar, whatever you would want to. And then you'll go ahead and add some milk to it. Now the amount of kefir grains here is quite less right now. These will grow over time once it's established and once it's like feeding adequately. So for this amount of grains, I'm just going to add like approximately a quarter cup of milk. And I use whole milk. I don't use the skim or 2% fat or any of it. I've seen that basically it works well with whole milk because the kefir feeds on practically almost everything in the milk. It eats up the lactose, it eats up, all of those things in there. So I'm just gonna add like approximately around a quarter cup of milk to this. Hold on, it's kind of a weird angle for me to pour it. That should be around it. Now that I have the milk in there, I'm just gonna stir it and leave it there for 24 hours and then come back to it. When I come back to it, I will basically strain this out, discard the milk, and then repeat the process of adding the milk the exact same way to the kefir grains. So in 24 hours. Go ahead and close it with the coffee filter. I don't want things falling into it, but I still do want it to breathe. Always let your kefir breathe. And I'm just securing it with a rubber band and going to leave it in a place without direct sunlight, and not a high temperature nor a low temperature, so between 60 to 90 F, which is practically most places room temperature, and come back to it in a day. So 24 hours later, if your kefir grains has taken a little longer in transit, so let's say, okay, first let's do the typical number of days in transit, so like around 2 to 3 days. 3 days mostly, yeah. So when the kefir grains arrive, they kind of need to be reawakened, which is what the process that we are starting off is. So we had taken the grains, we had put it in the milk. Now when we strain it, it'll mostly be still a bit thin, so something like this. So you can see that it's still kind of quite milky, but still starting to thicken up a tiny bit, as you can see here. So strain out all that milk. I would say discard it. it's not gonna taste anything particularly good at this point. Now take your jar, put the kefir grains back into it. At this point, you'll see that the grains have started to kind of like plump up a little bit, look a bit more hydrated from when you actually got it in mail. And now you just go ahead and repeat the process. You would add the milk to it and close it up the same way and keep it away for another 24 hours and let it do its job. So in most cases, by the second day, when you pour that same 1/4 cup of milk into it, same amount rather, you would start to see that the kefir is thickening. And if it has started thickening, if it is not, the regular thin looking milky situation, you can, when you strain it out, consume it. If not, I would suggest repeating the process for another day or two till your kefir starts to look thicker. You'll be able to see what I mean by thicker in my other videos on the channel. So at the maximum usually that it takes is like 5 days, and 5 days is when your the time that the kefir grains has been in transit is like around 7 days, 6 or 7 days. That is when you can expect it to take like around 5 days for it to actually reawaken. Now once the grains are established, in a week or so you would start seeing it multiplying. So then you would start being able to increase the amount of milk slowly, and at one point it just takes off. Your kefir grains will start multiplying really fast. I started with something like this, and now I have multiple pint jars, I think 5 or 6 at the moment, that are sitting making kefir at the point, and a couple of the dormant ones sitting in the refrigerator so that I don't have an explosion of kefir grains on my hand. So yeah, that's the very simple process of making kefir.